But first, those job numbers we mentioned, May, disappointing. The Street, the U.S. economy adding only 75,000 jobs in May, missing estimates of 175,000. The unemployment rate holding steady, though, at 3.6%. Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman is here to break down the numbers and kind of the overall reaction to this. Rick, what do you make of the miss?
It's not a disaster. These numbers fluctuate, so we're, obviously lower than expected. I think the thing that interests me is that if you look at the longer-term trend, there's a notable slowdown in hiring. So the average number of new jobs added this year is 164,000. That's down from an average of 223,000 new jobs per month last year. And you could ask a couple, it's not entirely clear what's happening, like what's really going on. It's possible that part of that is the labor shortage we keep hearing about, that companies who need workers can't find them. But it's also possible that a lot of companies are looking around and saying, first of all, we're very nervous about these President Trump's trade wars. And second of all, we just don't see where much growth is coming from in the future. So we're going to hold back on hiring.
But guys, we just showed that chart that showed the monthly gains, and we're talking about that blip in February that kind of spooked a lot of people. And people were saying, oh, that was just a one-off because of the government shutdown. But now when we're getting May, and that also disappoints. I mean, do you start connecting the dots between February and May and saying, okay, maybe it wasn't just a blip then. Maybe this is the new trend we're seeing?
I mean, I think a lot of people are connecting those dots. And I think, you've also got a yield curve inversion that's now starting to looking like it's a little more permanent than we thought. And you've got Brian Moynihan's already been on stage this week saying like the leveraged loan market's pretty terrifying, especially for a guy with billions in leveraged loans. But and then you get the market pumping because again, all it's seeing is it gets its rate hike, and this addiction to cheap money is really becoming pretty apparent.
To continue the conversation from On the Move, the analysts were saying that the deceleration of wages is something that the Fed needs to act preemptively on. Rick, what do you take on that?
I don't know what the Fed should do. I mean, everybody is so smart, aren't they, about what the Fed should do? I mean, wage growth is still around 3%. I mean, this is actually kind of a puzzle that economists don't completely understand. So they have been saying for years that we should have wage growth way higher than that, given the tightening in the labor market, and it's not happening. So one of the things that suggests is that the new jobs that have been coming on are just lower wage jobs that require fewer skills than higher wage jobs, where people would be in a better position to demand raises. Why is that number not going up more? I don't know. But one thing that there is just no inflation anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
that 2% target.
Runaway inflation has been right around the corner for 8 years, and it's going to be. It feels like it's going to be right around the corner for another 8 years. Is it different this time? You're never supposed to say it's different this time, but it is. I mean, like we should have inflation, and it's not there. So if you're the Fed, short-term rates are at 2.5%. What's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, the one thing,
that is like 3 points lower than the historical average.
And where's your room to winnow? I mean, if this thing is worse than it is, if this thing does get worse and you're lowering now, where do you lower to? I mean, this is like I was saying on Dealbreaker today. I remember when the market was clear-eyed before it got into cheap money, and it was like, this Yellen needs to push rates. What's she doing? Now it's like, Uncle Jay, give us that sweet cut.
So what is different this time is there seems to be this presumption that if we get in trouble, if we do have a recession or close, the Fed would cut down to zero again quickly, and then monetary easing is just a thing now. That's just the next step you do. I mean, this was controversial, experimental, and it was considered dangerous when the Fed started it in late 2008 and 2009.
Sure.
I'm not completely convinced that it 100% works and that there have been no deleterious effects from it. I mean, it's not over yet. Well, we haven't tightened our way out of the easing yet. So I don't know what the Fed should. I mean, I know you're seeing calls all over the place, and now the market expectation is the Fed is going to cut, and now the conversation has moved to, will it be 50 basis points or 75 basis points? But if you think about it, the unemployment rate is still 3.6%.
Yep.
There are signs of a slowdown, but there are also signs that the economy is just doing just fine. So what's Federal Reserve Chairman to do?
And it's a good point to your point, Thornton, when we're talking about if you do this now, what happens when maybe those job numbers aren't as good and we see other things continue in that trend or perhaps reverse? The unemployment rate may be shooting up. But you're right. Rick, you touched on the calls. Barclays now expecting a 50 basis point cut in July, and Morgan Stanley is saying that should not be ruled out as well. 50 basis point cut.
Look, I mean, where are we now? We're now like only 4% below record highs in the S&P 500.
Yeah.
Unemployment rate at 3.6%. I mean, is this a crisis? Is this a?
Doesn't sound like one, but you know.
I mean, this is like what the Bank of England. I'm old enough to remember when we laughed at Carney for getting stuck in this position. Now we're where he was. I mean, you're in this place where do you go up or down?
To be fair, they are caught in
There's a
this
monetary
spot.
policy geek right there.
They are caught in this spot where, with all these trade question marks, there's a lot to still sift through, and that is.
Thornton Slack at Deutsche Bank is sending around a good chart. Also, he's saying, look, you're hearing about market expectations for Fed rate cuts. Well, the market is often wrong in its expectations, and he's got it all outlined on a chart. The market said this was going to happen. It didn't happen. I think he's got 6 instances when the market said, oh, the Fed's going to cut, and they didn't. So maybe they won't.
And economists all over the place, too. So no one really knows what's going on, but that's why you got to keep watching Yahoo Finance. All right, Rick Newman, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.